The thing about Yonsei International University was that it had a way of making you feel like someone had taken a perfectly good academic institution and decided, halfway through construction, that restraint was for people who couldn't afford not to have it. The campus was not a campus. It was a statement, the kind of statement that came with a legal team. The main pathways were lined with stone imported from somewhere that had clearly never heard the word budget, and the academic buildings were made almost entirely of glass, which meant the students inside could watch the students outside, which, if you sat with that image long enough, told you everything you needed to know about how this place worked socially. The library had a rooftop terrace with a view of Seoul that made grown adults stop mid-sentence and forget what they were saying. The student lounge had furniture that belonged in a design museum. There was a courtyard garden with lighting that adjusted seasonally and a fountain that sounded expensive. Everything here sounded expensive. Zara Obi had arrived 8 months ago with 3 suitcases, one of which was entirely dedicated to her skincare, and the energy of a woman who had already seen beautiful things and had made her peace with being unimpressed by them. She was from London by way of Lagos. Her father, Emeka Obi, was a civil engineer turned infrastructure developer who had spent 30 years building things in Nigeria and West Africa, and now sat comfortably in the kind of success that meant he had an assistant who had an assistant. Her mother, Ngozi, was a literature professor at UCL with 3 published books and opinions about everything that Zara had spent her entire life deeply enjoying. Zara had grown up in a household where dinner conversations required citations, and being interesting was considered a basic standard of personal hygiene. She had a pool, she had summers in Portugal, she had parents who thought she was the finest thing either of them had ever made and told her so consistently and without embarrassment. So, no, she was not moved by the fountain. She was, however, deeply entertained by the people sitting next to it. It was a Wednesday morning in early October, and Zara was crossing the main quad at 8:52 a.m. with a flat white in one hand and a dog-eared copy of Yi Sang's collected works tucked under her arm, her locks wrapped half up and falling in thick coils the color of dark wood, swaying as she walked. She had on wide-leg trousers in olive green, a black ribbed turtleneck, and leather loafers that were polished in the way that suggested their owner respected both herself and the concept of effort. Her skin was deep brown and caught the autumn light like it had been designed to. Her eyes were large and unhurried, and they noticed everything. She was heading to her 9 a.m. modern Korean fiction seminar, which she was looking forward to with genuine enthusiasm, which made her eccentric by this campus's standards. Most students here attended lectures the way people attended mandatory meetings, with their bodies present and their spirits filed somewhere else entirely. She was about 2/3 across the quad when the car appeared. Not just any car. The kind of car that seemed to exist slightly outside the normal rules of physics, black and low and moving with the quiet authority of something that had never once been told to wait. It rolled through the campus entrance and stopped in the exact center of the main pathway with the complete confidence of a vehicle that had never in its life considered the concept of inconvenience. Students parted around it. Several reached for their phones. One girl actually stepped backward into someone else and didn't notice. Zara stopped because the car was directly in her path. The door opened. Out came Shin Jae-hyun. She didn't know his name yet. What she knew was that he was tall in the way that read as structural rather than incidental, with a face that belonged in the kind of advertising campaign that made people feel inadequate about their bone structure. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved across the crowd with the specific laziness of someone who had never once been told no, and had therefore never developed the facial muscles required to process it. He had on a long, dark coat with a collar that probably had a name she would recognize stitched inside it. He walked like the ground was mildly honored by the interaction. 2 men fell into step behind him immediately. Not friends. Zara knew the difference. Those were an entourage, which was a distinct and somewhat melancholy category of human arrangement. The girls within a certain radius went still in a very specific way. One of them smoothed her jacket. Another one laughed at nothing. Zara looked at her watch. 8:53. She looked at the car, which had not moved. She stepped around it and kept walking. She was 4 steps past when she heard it. "Yeah." She kept walking. "You, yeah." She stopped, not because it compelled her, but because she was the kind of person who found curious things worth a second look. She turned around slowly. Shin Jae-hyun was looking at her, not the way people usually looked at her here, the particular cocktail of uncertainty and fascination she had learned to navigate as the only black girl in most of her spaces. He was looking at her the way someone looks at something they have already decided they are interested in, which was a different and notably more presumptuous energy. "You walked past," he said in English, clean and accented. Zara tilted her head. Was there something to stop for? He paused. Then, with the gravity of someone making a significant announcement, he said, "I'm Shin Jae-hyun." Zara blinked once. "Okay, I'm running late." She turned and walked away. Behind her, the small pocket of space around Shin Jae-hyun went very, very quiet. She found out who he was by noon. It was not difficult. By the time she settled into her literature seminar, someone had already asked her if she was the girl from the quad. By lunch, 3 separate people had approached her table in the dining hall with varying configurations of disbelief on their faces. "You walked away," said her friend Adana, a Nigerian-British student studying international relations who had been Zara's first real friend at Yonsei and was currently gripping the edge of the table. "You just turned around and walked away from him." "I had class," Zara said, eating her rice. "Zara," Adana set down her chopsticks, "that was Shin Jae-hyun. You mentioned his family?" Adana lowered her voice in the theatrical way of someone narrating a documentary. "The Shin family. There are things said about them. Serious things. The kind of business that doesn't have a website." Zara sipped her water. "Okay." "He has never walked up to a girl on this campus. Ever. They go to him. He barely moves, and they go to him. And he introduced himself to me and expected me to be overwhelmed by the introduction," Zara said patiently, "which would have been a disservice to both of us. You don't help people grow by confirming their worst habits." Adana stared at her for a long moment. "Either you are the most self-possessed human being I have ever met, or you have absolutely no idea what you've just set into motion." "I went to class," Zara said. "Nothing is in motion." The second encounter was 4 days later and was entirely his doing. Zara had a Thursday afternoon rhythm. Between her 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock classes, she went to the small reading courtyard on the east side of campus, a quiet space with low stone benches and enough tree cover to create the impression of being slightly removed from everything. She had her annotated copy of Park Won-sa open on her lap, her locks in a loose bun, a second flat white on the bench beside her. She was deep in a passage about memory and grief when a shadow crossed the page. She did not look up. "You're in my seat," said Shin Jae-hyun. She finished her annotation. Then she looked up. "Your name is carved somewhere on this bench?" He looked at the bench. No name. He looked back at her. "I sit here Thursdays." "Then you sat here Thursdays," she said. "Past arrangement." Something moved across his face. Not quite irritation, more like a navigation system encountering a road that wasn't on its map. He pulled out the other half of the bench and sat down. She raised both eyebrows. "That wasn't an invitation." "I know," he said simply. "Interesting approach," she said, looking back at her book. "Very unbothered of you." "What does that mean?" "It means you move through the world like permission is optional. It's a very specific energy. Some people find it compelling. I find it instructive." Silence. She kept reading. "What are you studying?" he asked eventually. "Korean fiction." A pause. "Why?" She looked up then, with the patient expression of someone who is prepared for this question. "Why do people study things from outside their country of origin?" "I'm asking why you specifically." "Because Korean literature handles grief differently than anything I'd read before," she said. There's a particular weight to the way loss is written here. Not dramatic, just present. It sat with me. She paused. Also, Seoul has the best street food I have ever encountered in my entire life. And my mother said if I was going this far from home, I needed to go somewhere with good eating. Something flickered in his expression. That's a strange reason. It was part of a larger reason, she said. Keep up. His jaw moved. She returned to her page. You're not afraid of me, he said. It came out less like an accusation and more like a discovery, something he was saying to himself. She looked up. Should I be? He didn't answer. When she glanced up again 2 minutes later, he was still there, watching her with an expression she was beginning to find genuinely interesting. The particular look of someone encountering a thing that doesn't fit their existing categories and isn't sure whether to be unsettled or fascinated. In her experience, those two states arrived together frequently. I have work to do, she said. He stood slowly, in the unhurried way of someone for whom time has never been a concern. He adjusted his coat. I'll be here Thursday, he said. Good for you, she replied warmly. Try not to hover. One of his entourage, stationed at a careful distance, made a sound that was not quite a cough. Shin Jae-hyun said nothing. He walked away. Zara smiled at her page, small and private. Then she went back to Park Wonsa. By the end of the second week, she had assembled 3 facts about Shin Jae-hyun. 1, he was the undisputed social architecture of Yonsei International. Not loudly, not performatively, the way load-bearing walls are architecture. He sat somewhere, and the room organized itself in relation to that somewhere. He said something, and the conversation adjusted. He was not charismatic in the performing sense. He was simply structurally significant, and everyone in every room had absorbed this without being told. 2, he was academically serious in a way that surprised her, and then, on reflection, didn't. He was studying finance and economics, and was apparently the kind of student that professors described in the specific tone of resigned respect that meant he made their lives both easier and more irritating. His mind was sharp in a way that had nothing to do with inherited advantage and everything to do with how he was actually built. 3, he had started appearing in her proximity in a way that was technically explicable as coincidence and was absolutely not. She mentioned this to Adana over dinner on Friday. Adana put both palms flat on the table and breathed out slowly through her nose. Zara, he is coming for you deliberately. I know what he's doing, Zara said. And? Zara poured herself more water. And I think it's fascinating. He has never in his life had to try for anything. The world brings him things. And here he is, trying. She picked up her fork. I want to see how far he gets before he realizes he's going to have to completely dismantle and rebuild his entire approach to human beings. Adana looked at her with the specific expression of someone witnessing something they cannot decide is brave or catastrophic. You're not like other people, she said. I mean that descriptively, not as a compliment or an insult. I'll take it either way, Zara said. What she did not say, even to herself, not fully, was that Shin Jae-hyun was the first person at Yonsei who was genuinely not boring. She had been entertained by him. She was now interested by him, which was a different and more significant thing. The recalibrating silences, the way he kept showing up, the brief, unguarded moments where the performance slipped and something more complicated showed underneath, like architecture visible through scaffolding. She wasn't going to tell him that. Not yet. Not for a long time. His first real move came on a Monday, and she would be telling it later in life with the relish of someone describing a piece of theater that had exceeded all reasonable expectations. She was in the campus cafe at 8:15, waiting for her order, reading an email from her mother. Zara Obi communicated via all available channels simultaneously: texts, voice notes, emails, occasionally a handwritten letter photographed and sent as an attachment, depending on the gravity and complexity of the subject. This morning's email contained a photograph of the new study she had redesigned, a recommendation for a book Zara absolutely had to read, and a 4-paragraph analysis of a Nigerian film she had watched twice in 2 days. Zara was smiling at her phone in the completely unself-conscious way that people smile when they are reading something from someone they love without reservation. She registered his presence before she saw him. Shin Jae-hyun materialized at the pickup counter, ordered something in Korean that the barista processed with slightly elevated alertness, and then turned and looked at her. She waited. "You always look like that when you're on your phone," he said. She looked up. "Like what?" "Like you're reading something good." "I am," she said. "My mother." Something moved in his expression. He had started to say something, stopped himself. A sentence that had real weight in it went unfinished. Something about his own mother, she understood, that he wasn't ready to finish. She let it sit. She didn't reach for it. Her order arrived, she took her cup, turned to face him fully, and said with complete sincerity, "There was something true in what you just stopped saying. It'll still be there whenever you're ready." She walked to her usual table and opened her laptop. He stood at the counter for a full 4 seconds before his order appeared. She tracked it in her peripheral vision without looking up. He came and sat across from her without asking. Again. "You did the thing," she said to her screen. "What thing?" "Sitting without being asked." "You didn't make me leave last time," he said. "I strongly implied it." "I don't do well with implications," he said. "I prefer directness." She looked up at that. There was something genuine in it, something that wasn't performance, a small door he was opening without the usual ceremony. She tilted her head. "Fine, you can sit." He blinked. Then, slowly, almost visibly, something rearranged itself in how he was holding himself. "You said yes," he said. "You asked," she said. "Indirectly, but it was a question. I respond to questions." "Noted," he said quietly. She looked back at her screen. "You talk to me like a professor," he said after a moment, "like I'm being taught something." "I talk to everyone this way," she said. "Some people just haven't been spoken to like this before." "Like me?" "Like you," she confirmed. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, an ordinary gesture that made him look briefly like a person rather than an architectural feature. He looked out the window and she observed him in profile without the performance of being looked at. Still a remarkable face. She had cataloged that fact weeks ago and filed it under aesthetically notable, functionally irrelevant. "Tell me more about the Korean fiction," he said, like the question had been sitting in him for 2 weeks. She considered how much to give him and decided on the truth because she found evasion tedious. "My mother has been a literature professor my entire life," she said. "I grew up reading everything, and when I got to Korean writing, something in it answered a question I hadn't known I was asking. The emotional precision of it, the way it holds grief, not as an event, but as a permanent companion, the interiority." She paused. "My mother says the best literature doesn't tell you how to feel, it validates that you already feel it. Korean fiction does that for me." He was quiet, listening in the particular way she was beginning to recognize, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually receiving what she said. "And your mother," he said eventually, "she's why you read like that?" "Like what?" "Like it matters," he said. "Yes," she said simply. Something crossed his face, brief and complicated, the unfinished sentence passing through again. Then the careful expression returned, but slower than before. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I know," she said warmly. "I hope it's instructive." He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that suggested a smile lived somewhere nearby. She made a note of it. The problem, and she could acknowledge privately that it was becoming a named problem, was that Shin Jae-hyun was considerably more layered than her initial assessment had budgeted for. She had been accurate, she was certain. The entitlement, the system, the unexamined assumption that the world was arranged around his preferences, all of that held. But there were these hairline cracks, the half-finished sentence about his mother, the way his body tensed slightly every time someone mentioned the Shin family business in a particular tone, the way the real version of his face, quieter and less certain, appeared in unguarded moments, like a guest who had been waiting outside and finally got permission to come in. She mentioned none of this to Adana, because Adana would do something with her face and say something she couldn't unhear. Instead, she went to her seminar and took thorough notes, and declined to think about it. She managed this until approximately 2 p.m., when the second collision occurred. The dining hall at Yonsei International had, like all institutions with social hierarchies, a geography. The south-facing tables with good natural light were occupied by the students who had opinions about being seen. The center tables were the general population. The north end near the beverage station was occupied by the people who had opted out of all of this and were simply there to eat, which Zara found deeply honorable. Zara sat with Adana and their loose international constellation. There was Felipe from Colombia, studying urban planning, Seo Ji-young, a Korean student who had grown up partly in Cape Town and moved through both worlds with the ease of someone who had never needed to choose between them, Kofi from Ghana, studying economics, a good table, good light, room for everyone, no performance required. She was most of the way through her meal when the presents arrived. Park Soo-yeon was the kind of beautiful that had institutional support behind it. Her family was in entertainment, television specifically, and she had the particular confidence of a person who had been exceptional for so long that it had stopped being an opinion and become a geological fact. She had studied communications, which everyone understood was supplementary to the social communications she had been conducting since birth. She and Jae-hyun had a history that the campus information network rendered in varying dramatic detail depending on the narrator. She stopped at Zara's table. Zara looked up with the relaxed expression of someone who has correctly identified what this is and has already decided not to be exhausted by it. "You're Zara," Soo-yeon said, not a question. "I am," Zara confirmed. Soo-yeon's eyes moved over her with the practiced assessment of someone who has been ranking things for so long it has become involuntary. Her gaze settled on Zara's locks, loose today and falling past her shoulders, and something moved in her expression that she didn't fully bother to conceal. "I've noticed you talking to Jae-hyun," she said. "He's been talking to me," Zara corrected pleasantly. "It's worth distinguishing." Adana beside her went very still. Soo-yeon offered a smile that was shaped like warmth and made of something considerably more architectural. "He gets interested in new things sometimes," she said. "It's usually temporary. Just thought you should know how it tends to go." Zara picked up her spoon. "Thank you for the context," she said, in the exact warm tone her mother used when she was being simultaneously gracious and immovable. "That was very considerate. We're done now, I think." The table was quiet. Soo-yeon stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then she left. The silence at the table lasted one more beat. Then Felipe put his fork down very slowly and said in a barely audible voice, "I feel like I just watched a chess match and didn't understand it until someone got checkmated."
"She wasn't checkmated," Zara said. "She was redirected. There's a difference." "Zara," Adana's voice was doing a thing. "Do you know who that was?" "Someone running a system that doesn't work on me," Zara said. "She's probably fine. She's just been operating in rooms where everyone plays by the same rules and found out that's not universal." Jae-hyun, who had been quiet throughout, looked at Zara with a slow, admiring assessment. "You're genuinely unbothered," she said softly, not as a tactic. "I care about things worth caring about," Zara said simply. She pointed at Adana's untouched food with her spoon. "Eat. You'll need strength later when you debrief this in detail, which I can tell you're already planning." Jae-hyun found out about the dining hall by 3:30 p.m. Campus information traveled at the speed of collective fascination. He materialized outside the East Building as she was leaving her afternoon lecture, walking with the expression of a man whose social topography had shifted without his involvement. "Soo-yeon came to your table," he said. "She did," Zara confirmed, walking. He fell into step beside her. The ease of it registered, less deliberate now than it had been in the early weeks. What did she say? Nothing that required energy. "What did you say?" She glanced sideways at him. "That I was eating and we were finished." He stopped walking. She took 2 more steps and turned back. He had an expression she hadn't cataloged before. Not the recalibration, not the performance, something more unguarded than both, more immediate, something that looked almost involuntarily like concern. "She can make things difficult," he said. "On campus, socially. She has connections." Jae-hyun. She said his name without the formal register and watched him register it. I've been the only black girl in most of my rooms since I was 7 years old. I've been looked past, spoken over, smiled at in ways that were not actually smiles, and made to feel like a guest in spaces I deserved to occupy. She met his eyes steadily. And I am still here, extremely well-read and wearing very good shoes. Soo-yeon is not a problem that requires your intervention. He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, something softer than anything he'd shown her yet, he said, "You don't need anything from anyone, do you?" It came out less like an accusation and more like something he was working out. "I need things," she said. "I just don't need them from people who haven't earned the right to offer them yet." Yet. She heard him catch it. She let it sit between them, doing its small, precise work. She turned and kept walking. Behind her, she felt him standing exactly where she had left him, recalibrating again, but this time with the quality of someone who had come out the other side of the calculation with a different answer and thought for the first time that this one might be correct. There was a particular kind of danger in finding someone genuinely interesting. Zara had understood this for a long time. Interest was the first door. Once she walked through it, she was the kind of person who went all the way in, which meant the entry point required real consideration. She had watched people fall into other people like falling into water, fast and total and gasping, and she had always been the one standing at the edge thinking about depth. Her mother called it discernment. Her father called it hard-won good sense. Zara called it knowing herself well enough to be careful with herself. Shin Jae-hyun was becoming something she needed to pay attention to. She didn't announce this dramatically. It arrived one Tuesday evening in the library, 4th floor, locks loose around her shoulders, looking up from her notes for no particular reason, thinking with complete calm, "This is becoming a thing I need to take seriously." Then she went back to her notes. But she paid attention. The shift in him was gradual, and then it wasn't. He arrived in the reading courtyard that Thursday with 2 coffees. He set one in front of her without comment and opened his own cup with concentrated attention and said nothing. She looked at the cup, then at him. "What is this?" "Coffee." "I have coffee." She pointed at her existing cup. "That one's cold," he said, eyes on his own cup. "You left it an hour ago when you found something worth reading." She looked at her cup. It was cold. She looked back at him. His ears, she noticed, were faintly pink at the tips. Shin Jae-hyun, heir to something large and probably complicated. Campus sun, pink ears. She picked up the coffee. "Thank you." "It's fine," he said immediately, in the voice of someone who had prepared to be unbothered and was finding it required more effort than expected. She smiled at her notes. "You remembered how I take it," she said, tasting it. He said nothing. "I notice things," he said eventually, with a dignity that was charming in its transparency. "You do," she agreed. "It's one of the things on the list." He looked at her. "What list?" She tapped her temple. "Running assessment. How I understand people." "What else is on it?" She pretended to consider. "You're genuinely intelligent, not in a performed way. You actually think. You observe people with precision and usually use it for social positioning when you could be using it for actual human understanding." She paused. "And you are lonelier than you let anyone see." His jaw moved. The faint pink spread. "I didn't say it to be unkind," she said. "I said it because it's true, and I think you've known it for a long time, and almost everyone in your life is too invested in the architecture of you to name it." She met his eyes directly. "Am I wrong?" A long quiet. The courtyard tree moved in a small wind. The fountain did its gentle work. "No," he said, quietly, like it cost something to say. Zara nodded once, matter-of-factly, and went back to her book. They sat in that silence for another hour. It was the most honest silence she had experienced at Yonsei. She filed it carefully. What she had not anticipated was the specificity of his campaign. Not grand gestures, not the entitled performance she had half expected from someone of his background and habit. Something more considered than that, more deliberate in a way that suggested he had been paying the kind of attention that most people only paid when they had already decided something mattered. She had been trying for 3 weeks to get a ticket to a reading at a small literary space in Hongdae, a contemporary Korean poetry night that had sold out in under 10 minutes online. She mentioned it once in passing. 4 days later, he sent her a message, the first time he had ever messaged her directly, the number obtained through channels she suspected involved Ji-young and patient social engineering. The message contained a photo of 2 tickets and the single word, Hongdae. She stared at her phone. Then she typed back, "How?" He replied, "I know the right people." She typed, "That's either impressive or slightly alarming." He replied, "Yes." She sent a period. Then she called Adana, who gasped and gripped her arm through the phone somehow and said "Zara" at a volume that warranted no punctuation. She went to the poetry reading. She did not invite him, she went with Adana, and had an evening that made her feel like language was an act of grace. And she walked home afterward and sent him a voice note describing one poem in specific detail, which was more than he expected and less than he wanted, and she had calculated it to be exactly that. He listened to it 4 times. She didn't know this yet. She would find out later. His friends, encountered at close range, turned out to be people. From a distance, Jae-hyun's entourage had always read to her as functional furniture. Up close, they were distinct. Oh Min-jun was the quiet one, built broad and speaking rarely, but when he spoke, it arrived in single sentences of such understated wit that you almost missed the joke until it was already in you. Song Tae-young was mixed Korean and Taiwanese, studied architecture, talked constantly, and had the energy of someone who had been the loudest person in every room he'd ever entered, and made his peace with this.
They both attached to her presence with Jae-hyun, with the slightly wary, highly amused quality of people watching their friend navigate a situation none of his previous experience had prepared him for. Min-jun said to her, the first time they were properly introduced, he spent a whole week talking about the bench thing. He looked at Jae-hyun briefly. Jae-hyun said, "Min-jun," in a tone that contained an entire letter. "You told him to say that," Zara said to Jae-hyun. Min-jun's face remained perfectly blank. "I had thoughts, and I shared them." Tae-yang, from 3 feet away, said quietly, "He was told specifically to say that," and walked off at pace. Jae-hyun looked at Zara with the expression of a man whose support system had just performed a coordinated betrayal. "Your friends are honest," Zara told him. "That's worth protecting." "I'm reconsidering the friendships," Jae-hyun said. "You're not," she said. He wasn't. The moment that changed the actual temperature of things happened on a Friday in October, and it involved a rainstorm, a convenience store, and Shin Jae-hyun saying a true thing out loud for possibly the first time in years. The rain started while they were leaving a documentary screening the International Student Association had organized. Adana had left early with Felipe in a way that Zara was choosing not to examine. Jae-hyun had been at the screening, which was either coincidence or wasn't, and they had both left at the same time, which led to walking in the same direction without officially calling it a thing they were doing. The rain arrived without warning. One moment, dry. Next moment, full soul autumn rain, the kind that didn't suggest itself before arriving. They ran the 10 meters to the nearest convenience store and pushed inside, both of them damp and slightly breathless, standing on the entrance mat while rain hammered the glass behind them. She looked at him. His expensive coat was dark at the shoulders. Water had pushed his hair off his forehead. He looked, for the first time in her knowledge of him, completely caught off guard, prepared for nothing. She laughed, not at him, or not exactly, at the two of them. At the situation, at the rain, at the fluorescent lighting and the floor mat and the fact that this was where they had landed. It was a real laugh, unguarded and bright. He looked at her laughing, and something happened in his face that she didn't have a file for yet, something that was watching her and couldn't look away. "You're soaked," he said. "Thoroughly," she agreed. She pushed her locks back and moved into the store with the practical energy of someone who knows how to handle a situation. She grabbed a small towel from a shelf and tossed one to him without looking. He caught it. They stood in the snack aisle while the rain made its noise against the window. She ate a sweet potato stick, and he stood beside her with his towel over his shoulder, like someone who had done a sport and wasn't sure what came next. He was watching her with that expression again. "You're staring," she said.
"I'm looking," he said. "What's the difference?" "Staring is unconscious." He said it directly, meeting her eyes. "I'm doing this on purpose." She looked at him sideways. That was a genuinely smooth thing to say. I'll give you that. "Only mildly?" he said. "Don't press it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain made its full noise. The store hummed around them. Someone's phone rang near the refrigerated drinks. A bored employee reorganized a shelf near the front. "Zara," he said. Something about her name and his mouth in that specific register made her go still. He had said it before, but not like that, not weighted, not like the word itself mattered. She looked at him. "I don't know how to do this," he said, without any of the performance, just a man saying a true thing plainly. "I have not before wanted to know someone the way I want to know you."
I've wanted things. I've wanted people. But this is different, and I don't know the word for the difference. He stopped, jaw working slightly. "It's a want that doesn't fit the system," she offered quietly. "Yes," he said, like she had named the exact shape of it. "And I don't know how to run this system for something I actually care about not losing." He looked at her. "You are the first person in a long time who made me feel like how I normally operate is insufficient," she said. "Yes," he exhaled, like it cost. She was quiet for a moment. This was the door. She understood that. This specific moment, this fluorescent-lit, rain-soaked, floor-mat-damp moment. Him saying a true thing badly and honestly, with his whole actual self present, which was somehow more persuasive than anything polished could have been. She had thought about water temperature. She had thought about depth. She had brought a towel. "I'm not uncomplicated," she said. "Not a warning, an orientation. Not because I'm difficult, but because I know what I'm worth, and I need someone who also knows it. Not just someone who is fascinated by me because I didn't dissolve when they said their name." "I know," he said. "You don't yet," she said, "but I think you're the kind of person who can come to know it. That's genuinely rare." She paused. "That's actually quite a lot." He breathed out, slow and deliberate, like something had been set down. "So what does that mean?" he said. She looked at the rain, which was beginning to ease. She looked back at him. "It means you can keep trying," she said. "It means and paying attention." She picked up her bag. "It means you should walk me home because I have good boots, but this coat was not made for this weather, and you owe me a dry route." He looked at her coat. Then he looked up at her with an expression that was entirely new in his catalog, softer than anything she'd seen on him, and more present than all of it combined. "I have an umbrella," he said, "in the car." "Of course you do," she said, and walked toward the door. He followed. She understood, without drama, that he would keep following, and she understood, quietly and carefully and with her full attention, that she was going to let him, not because she needed him, because she wanted to see who he became when someone finally required him to be real. That, she thought, stepping out into the soft remaining rain beside Shin Jae-hyun, was going to be worth every single careful step. 18 months later. That was how long it had taken Shin Jae-hyun to become someone Zara Obi would call hers. Not 18 months of waiting, because Zara did not wait as a passive practice. 18 months of watching, of paying attention with the full weight of herself, of cataloging the small, true things and deciding one by one that they added up to something real. They were in her apartment, not the dormitory. She had moved off campus in her second year, into a bright, organized space in Mapo-gu that her mother had helped her choose, and her father had insisted on covering, a fourth-floor flat with good southern light and high enough ceilings to feel like thinking happened here. It had bookshelves that were serious, and plants that were thriving, and candles her mother sent from London every few months, and a kitchen that smelled like the food she had learned to cook here and the food she had grown up eating at home simultaneously. It was, Adana had said on first visit, completely and entirely Zara, warm and deliberate, and full of chosen things. Jae-hyun was on her couch. This was no longer a sentence that required comment. He was on the couch with his long legs stretched out and his coat folded over the armrest, and his particular public self, the one that rearranged rooms, set aside at the door like something he only needed outside. Seoul beyond her window was doing what Seoul did in spring, blooming with full commitment, the cherry trees along the river at maximum performance, the light carrying that softness that made even the ordinary look lit from within. Zara was in the kitchen, making jollof. She cooked on weekend evenings when she had the time and the inclination, and she had both today. Her locks were wrapped up in a headscarf printed in orange and yellow. She had on a wide linen shirt and thick socks that Jae-hyun had once examined with great seriousness and declared aesthetically indefensible. She had told him the door was available if he had opinions about her socks. He had not used the door. He never used the door when she said that. They both knew this. It had become its own ritual, the kind that only exists inside something real. "Your mother sent another voice note," he said, from the couch. Her phone was on the coffee table, lit with her mother's contact photo, Ngozi mid-lecture at UCL, head tilted, completely in her element. "She sends them every day," Zara said, stirring.
"I know," he said. There was something in the way he said it, the same thing that had been there since the beginning. Not envy, exactly. Something quieter. Something that sat next to the unfinished sentence from the campus cafe and had been kept carefully close for 18 months. She had never pushed that sentence. She had left it open like a window with the screen up, waiting to see if he came back to it in his own time. He had, gradually, in pieces. She had learned the shape of his relationship with his father through the spaces around the things he said. She had learned what his childhood had actually been like when he described it once as organized, and she had understood organized the way she understood all words that were doing too much work for a feeling that needed a bigger word. She carried the pot to the table, set down 2 bowls, and settled onto the couch beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. He looked at the bowl. She had made his slightly less spicy than hers, adjusted by increments over time based on nothing he had said and everything she had noticed. He ate without comment, the way you eat something that has become familiar and good. "I've been thinking," he said. "About," she said. He held the spoon, looking at it. "Next year, after graduation." She listened. "My father has expectations," he said. The word came with its usual freight. "Come back into the family, full operational role, Busan-based." He paused. "I've been deciding that I don't want that." She turned to look at him. "I've been deciding," he said, "that there are things I want more than what was already written for me before I was old enough to write anything." He looked up at her. "You said something once to Adana about seeing who I would become when someone required me to be real." She had said that to Adana, not to him. "Adana told me," he said, without any shame about it, "months ago." Zara made a mental note about Adana, an affectionate one. "And?" she said. "And I think I've been building the answer," he said. "I think I know what it is." He set the spoon down, turned toward her fully. "I want to build something myself, something clean, mine, chosen, not the inheritance, not the expectation." He met her eyes. "There's a business development program in Seoul, legitimate and rigorous. I've been looking at it." "You've been looking at it?" "For a few months," he said. Jae-hyun. She said his name steadily, but something in her chest was doing something warm. "You built a whole plan quietly?" "I had a good example," he said simply. She looked at him. He held the look without flinching, with the patience he had spent months learning. She remembered the exact conversation where it had started to change, a late evening on this same couch when she had said, "I think before I answer," and "That's not withdrawal, that's engagement," and he had nodded and filed it and had not interrupted her silences since. "There's something else," he said. "Say it." "I want you to not make any decisions about after graduation," he said, "without talking to me about them first, together." He held her gaze. "I'm not telling you what to decide. I'm asking to be in the room when you decide." She felt the distinction land. She had been the one who had drawn that distinction for him, the difference between asking to be included and expecting deference. The fact that he had learned it and was now using it correctly in the most significant conversation they had had yet meant something so large she needed a moment with it. "My parents want me home for summer," she said. "I know. They've been asking about you," she said, by name. "My mother has a substantial opinion." Something careful and wanting moved through his expression. "What kind of opinion?" The good kind, Zara said. She said, and I'm quoting faithfully, "Any man who finds my daughter a sold-out poetry reading and sends the tickets with no accompanying performance of generosity has the right instincts." She paused. "My father said less and meant more. He said he'd like to meet you when you're ready." Shin Jae-hyun, who had negotiated rooms with men whose names moved markets, who had walked into chambers designed to intimidate without blinking, looked quietly and genuinely terrified. She gave him 3 seconds with it. "They're going to love you," she said. "Not because of your name, because of who you've been becoming." She held his gaze. "I've been watching the whole time. The list is long." "What does it say?" he said. His voice was lower now, stripped of everything that wasn't real. She considered. Outside the open window, the spring air came through, carrying the city and the blooming and the river somewhere in the middle distance. "It says," she said carefully, "that you are one of the most genuinely sharp people I have ever sat across from, that you are capable of a loyalty that most people in your position never develop because no one ever sat still long enough to require it of them, that you have been learning how to be soft, which is hard, and you have not stopped learning even when it was uncomfortable, which is not a small thing at all." She paused. "It says that the laugh you keep somewhere under everything else is one of the finest sounds I've collected in a long time. It says that you brought me cold coffee on a Thursday because you had been paying attention since before you had any reason to, and that was the most honest thing you did in those early weeks. It says that you were worth every careful step I took getting here." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was very deliberate, like someone carrying something irreplaceable. "Zara, I love you," he said, for the first time, simply and without any of the performance, the way he said the things that were most true, plainly and imperfectly, and with himself completely present. "I have for a while. I didn't have language for it before because nobody taught me what it was supposed to feel like when it was actually real." He exhaled. "It feels like this, like being required to be real and choosing to be anyway, like the list, like the coffee, like not leaving when you tell me the door's there." He paused. "Like this being the place I want to be." The warm thing in her chest was no longer complicated. She leaned forward and took his face in both her hands, warm and steady, her thumbs at his jaw, looking at him the way she had looked at him from the beginning, with everything, missing nothing. "Shin Jae-hyun," she said. "Yeah," he said softly. "I love you too," she said. "I have been for a while. I was waiting until you knew how to hold it properly." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were clear and entirely his, no performance anywhere in them. "Do I know how now?" he said. She smiled. Small first, then not small at all, full and warm and made entirely for him. "You're getting there," she said. He laughed. The real one, the one she had first heard in the campus cafe over her mother's documentary opinions, the one that made him look younger than everything he carried and completely, entirely himself. She leaned in and kissed him. Outside, Seoul bloomed in every direction, extravagant and patient, like something that had always known it had somewhere to arrive. Some people come into your life wanting to be the most significant thing in your sky. Zara Obi had not needed that. She had needed someone who would sit across from her and be real. Shin Jae-hyun, in the end, had given her exactly that, and she, in the end, had given him something no one before her had offered, the experience of being known completely and wanted entirely because of it. If you watched this all the way through, subscribe, because there is so much more where this came from, and you don't want to miss what comes next.